Hello and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing? I'm just curious, are you still feeling the ripple effects of the eclipses and full moon in Scorpio? I definitely am, and I felt a bit like I've been on an emotional and healing roller coaster, to be honest. Like, for example, last night I was just feeling completely overwhelmed. I'd been triggered by something earlier that day that came up. But what happened afterwards in the evening was that this tsunami of emotions that needed to just be given some space and a voice flooded over me. And although it felt really cathartic to be able to bring these emotions up, I also felt really physically overwhelmed by them and kind of taken over by these feelings. So I went outside and quite literally hugged the tree in the front yard, and that allowed me to kind of release in the form of tears a lot of the emotions that were just under the surface. And I had my heart chakra actually pressed up against the tree, and that just made it feel so safe for me to relax into it and to allow the tree to hold me. It was amazing because I felt really enveloped by its energetic field, and it felt really wonderful and actually surprisingly natural to turn to this tree as I would have as a child run up to my mother or my grandmother for comfort and reassurance. And it was such a good reminder and real life experience of what my guest, Dr. Saskia von Diest, and I talk about in today's episode. And that's the fact that all of nature is our kin, is our family. And that at the heart of what we're all seeking is really to know that we're connected to all that is, that we belong, and that we're loved and held through our life's journey. So I hope you've got a cup of tea with you because you're going to want to settle in for this beautiful conversation. I first discovered Saskia and her work around nature communication last year while I was attending a virtual animal communication summit. And when I did come across her work, it just felt like I'd found a soul sister. And I know that you're going to feel the same way too after listening to this. Like me, Saskia is a recovering academic. She earned a PhD in plant pathology and has a background in postdoctoral research on how intuitive interspecies communication is used in agriculture. Since then, Saskia has pursued her own passion for supporting others in having their own communication experiences with non-human nature and develop that both for their own benefit and for the collective benefit. She's been communicating with various forms of nature for 11 years, and with 15 years experience in teaching and facilitating in various countries, Saskia loves creating opportunities for individuals and groups to connect and communicate with nature's healing power and practical wisdom. She's also trained in Family Constellations and in the way of the warrior healer. Saskia founded Ecofluency in 2021 to consult, teach, and facilitate nature communication experiences for individuals, groups, and organizations, as well as to promote other voices in the field. In this conversation today, Saskia and I talk about how Ecofluency developed, and we do a deep dive into what it means to connect to and communicate with all of life, all of consciousness, and why this is so needed in today's world. Here's a spoiler alert. Not only can you communicate directly with nature, but you're already doing it. Saskia shares her own story of how entering into nature communication helped her to heal a deep sense of loneliness. She also talks about a communication session that she did with a client's dog who was crossing the Rainbow Bridge. And this dog helped to reframe and shed some more light on the spiritual roles that humans and dogs are playing for one another. She also shares a surprising message from the land to a client of hers who wanted to protect it. This is one of those conversations that will remind you of just how important your personal thread is to this whole tapestry of life. and leave you changed. Saskia provides us with some really easy tips for starting your own nature communication journey today with your own dog. If you'd like to work with Saskia, starting on May 6, 2024, she's running a 6-week online course that's designed for all experience levels, so stay tuned until the end for details. You can also check out the show notes for a link to Saskia's website, ecofluency.org, where you can find out more about her offerings, including this course and a summer solstice workshop that she's going to be holding in the UK. Finally, can I ask you for a quick favor? If you're enjoying this podcast, I would be so incredibly grateful if you would please take a moment to rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. This would mean so much to me, as well as to the lovely algorithms that help other mystic dog mamas and papas who are looking for community to find us. And if you'd like me to do a future episode on a particular topic, or you'd like me to reach out to a potential guest, just let me know. You can reach me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Now, I suggest that you listen all the way through to the outro for a super special opportunity to win a free animal communication session with me. I'll share all of the details on how to enter after Saskia and I finish our conversation, so stay tuned. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Saskia. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. I am so thrilled to welcome you on as a guest.
Hi, Alexia. I'm so pleased that you've invited me. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure completely. I wanted to let the audience know before I kind of dive into your story how I came across your work, which was by happenstance, and I don't believe in coincidence at all. But I was attending Kara Govin's Animal Communication Summit, her online summit that she does. And I was scanning through the different guests and I saw that you were going to be talking about your work around ecofluency. And I was immediately like, ooh, I need to know more about this. And then when I attended the talk, it was such a gift because it was like no other. When we tend to talk about animal communication, I think we initially think about like communicating with our pets, which is something that I do. And that's something that I think is really great. But what I really love is that your work takes it that one step further that is so necessary right now, which is broadening communication to all of life, to all that we are experiencing, and inviting us to look at how we are part and parcel of everything that is around us. We're not separate from this, and that it is, as you've said before, our divine birthright to be able to communicate with the natural world around us. So I'm excited to see how this conversation unfolds, and I know people are going to get so much value out of it.
Thank you.
Would you mind starting perhaps by telling us a little bit about you and how you kind of got down this path that led you towards ecofluency?
Yeah, happy to share the story because I find that sharing my story as somebody who hasn't grown up naturally being able to communicate with animals, or at least don't remember knowing that that's actually a thing one can do. It's like we're remembering ourselves back into this. Sharing my story helps others to be like, oh, well, if it can work for her, it can work for me, you know. So firstly, I want to preface it by saying that I feel very much like I'm still a recovering academic. And the reason I say that is because from the time I was a child, I really wanted to be a scientist. I believed that science was the be all and the end all of a field that could find solutions to the issues that we face in modern day society and in general as humans. So I started out studying agriculture because it's the largest interface that we have with the rest of nature. And I deliberately say rest of nature because obviously all listeners by now also recognize that we are nature, but even I sometimes forget it. So it's a deliberate little nugget of like that we are the rest of nature. So, and you'll find I do a lot of these little tangents. So please excuse me if I forget to close bracket between them and I jump around. So I studied agriculture and ended up doing my PhD in plant pathology, so which is agricultural plant diseases. And it was during that PhD that I heard at a friend's birthday party about animal communication for the first time. And it sparked something in me of, oh, I thought that's something that only cartoon characters and Marvel comic heroes and so on can do. But if it's possible for us, I want to know more. And I was highly, highly skeptical. So after this birthday party, I got all the books I possibly could, read as much as I could, from Martha Williams to Carol Gurney to Amelia Kincaid, Penelope Smith, and some of the stories in them sounded very far out. But I was very pleased that I had that exposure to a wide range of animal communication because I was living with a dog at the time. I was also engaged at the time. And a year after going to this party, I decided I'd pluck up the courage to go to an animal communication workshop. So some other people might think, oh, but why didn't you do that immediately? I'd only heard about one animal communicator, which was Anna Breitenbach, who is very well known now in our field. And she was doing weekend workshops at the time. This is end of 2012. So I did a workshop with her, and that was the beginning of the rest of my life. In that, we were communicating with animals, which is like a standard practice in weekend workshops. You look at pictures of animals, and it's through them, the pictures, that you're communicating with the animals at a distance. And I was able to get information through the methods that Anna was sharing with us, time and time again, that I could validate. And so the scientist in me was realizing this is what I needed. I wanted my own experiential evidence because I know, coming from a scientific background, that the results are only as good as the questions you ask in science. And results, unfortunately, data can be cooked. So I wanted my own hardcore evidence that I couldn't deny. And I had that. But the thing that changed for me the most was realizing that I never need to be alone again. And I hadn't realized quite how lonely I'd felt before that, because I led what looked like a picture perfect life. And it was actually the change of everything. My engagement fell apart at the time. I moved out at the end of my PhD. I had become too weird, essentially. Like, none of my colleagues understood, because I didn't shut up about this either. I was willing to share with anybody who was wanting to listen. And ended up doing an advanced workshop with Winter Worsthorn and Anna combined. And that's where I met other friends of mine, like Kate Miller, who's a very good animal communicator. And my whole friendship circle changed, my life changed, my worldview changed. So that was really the entry point for me into not only animal communication, but the rest of nature communication, and a different way of not only thinking, but of being in the world, where I found a sense of belonging that I didn't realize I was looking for. And I knew that science was never going to offer me that. And science, don't get me wrong, is wonderful, but it is only a methodology, and it is only 400 years old, and it has its limitations, and it's based on the worldview that it was set up with. Which is why this, as you well know, and the listeners well know, is a way of accessing directly the deeper wisdom and the intelligence and the power of all of nature that is indisputable. And we can never, through that, obviously say this is the truth with capital T, but we can say this is truth the way I've experienced it, and it's a way of making meaning in our life. And so one could say that animal communication was the gateway drug to something that I feel now addicted to. So a recovering academic, but now addicted to exploring different ways of being and knowing, but in a way that always feels as much as possible grounded and aims to be practical. So that's the goal with this work, is to improve the lives of all of life on this beloved earth of ours. Yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. I can relate to so much of your story. And I too am a recovering academic. And, and I think that's probably a lifelong process, to be honest, because you recognize, I mean, again, academia, like science, has so much to offer, but there is so much conditioning. And I found for myself, my PhD was done in using participatory art and design to explore how to help individuals connect with wicked problems. So problems that don't have any one solution, but in attempting to do something about that problem, you then trigger other issues. So something like climate change, like these big, overwhelming problems, how do we find a connection to it? How do we see ourselves as empowered to make any kind of a difference and not just feel like a sense of apathy, or I'm just going to give up because it's too big, we're doomed anyway? And as a result of that kind of a process and a way of thinking, it automatically challenges silos and it challenges the conditioning that we have been born and raised in. And academia is part of that conditioning. So I always had this rub against the very institution that was supporting the work that I was doing. But it really helped me to look at all of the different levels of conditioning and all of the different ways that even though I'm somebody that doesn't like to think in silos, and I very much was about breaking down the silos, where I was still bound by some of that within myself. And you talk about animal communication being your gateway drug. I joke all the time that my dog Lucky is my gateway drug as well. I literally use that term because I think something that's so amazing about dogs, and the listeners will, I'm sure, feel the same way as well, that they become the gateway for us to open up these silos, open up this conditioning, open up the separation that we have been indoctrinated to believe about our separation from nature and who we truly are, that they catalyze this new way, this opportunity for us to shift our own paradigms because we quite literally brought the wild wolf into our home. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can see my little wild wolf on the couch, very comfortable on the couch now.
Looks more rabbit than wolf, but
He
has the
does.
heart of the wild, I'm sure, inside.
He does. Those ears, they are ginormous.
Super cute.
He is super
But what
cute.
you're saying makes so much sense to me because yes, there's something that we learn about using an analytical approach that we can turn on ourselves, and when we can tone down the critical in a way that is destructive and we can use it to benefit us, then we can start to improve things through logic and structure.
Right.
And as somebody who never felt like they belonged, I grew up in South Africa, which is so complex in so many different ways, socioeconomic and political and cultural. It's a mixing pot. Also, my dad is German, my mom is Indian, from two vastly different backgrounds. It's also culturally and economically. It meant that I didn't know how to be in the world other than something that was standardized. And that's what science offers, is standardization. So it was a place where I could feel safe and exceed as much as possible if I could through merit. But the benefit that I found from nature communication that something like science offers is because I'm also Virgo, so I'm very detail
Me
oriented.
too. I'm a Virgo as
That's
well. Yeah.
okay. So you'll recognize then that because of that, it helps people like us. And I don't know what your background is in terms of how you got into animal communication, but it helped me understand a structural or an analytical or logical approach to learning animal communication. That's what I needed. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
appreciated about Anna's approach, because she's also very analytical minded. And now when I teach, I found that I'm able to reproduce those similar structures and guidelines that I've now distilled and added to over the years in my own teaching. But for other people who also have not grown up being able to do this, and from people who come from a corporate background or scientific background or any other kind of background that is, quite box thinking, and productivity or efficiency driven, it gives a bridge to another way of being, which could otherwise come across as quite fluffy.
Oh,
So
100%.
it's like the low hanging fruit. My work offers that low hanging fruit to people wanting something that feels more spiritual, but they maybe don't want to put it that way because it sounds like it could be stigmatized. But what nature communication, and I say specifically nature communication, and I'll keep it broad, and I generally veer away from words like telepathy, even though of course that's exactly what it is. But this offers a gentle gateway into it.
It does. It does. And oh my God, yeah, the whole Virgo thing that's been like the bane of my existence in many respects. I also, for those who are interested in astrology, I have a Pisces moon. So I struggle with that kind of axis, right? Of like being open to and being driven by the intuitive and all that spiritual. And then the Virgo in me that's like, but how does this make sense? You've got to make this, it's it's a fun ride. It's a fun ride. But I agree with you that there's something that so first of all, like anyone can do animal communication or nature communication. And the reality is we're already doing it.
But
Yeah,
taking
because we're humans and we are nature, and therefore we are nature communicators. Well done.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think something like taking a course, in my experience, what it did was it gave me that framework that I could repeat and I could find that validation, because I had the same kind of experience as you did, that when I first took like a workshop, I don't think it's just the Virgo in me. I think it's that we are raised in particularly in Western culture, where you're, like you're saying, productivity minded, you need results, like put it on paper, like how do you prove this? And I was getting tangible results from that. So it satisfied that part of me that needed external validation in order to believe what I already knew internally. Like I already felt it. So it was getting the logical mind on board with the felt sense of things. And I feel like it is an opening for anyone who wants to further explore themselves as spiritual beings, however you want to think about spirituality, whatever that means for you. But it really does give a useful framework that sits outside of dogma, that sits outside of any kind of particular tradition that you may feel a rub with for whatever reason. It kind of gets to the core of what I think most spiritual traditions really are about, and that is about seeing ourselves as this spirit, as this consciousness, as just as everything, the all that is. We are part of all that is. And all of these different traditions talk about that from different vantage points, different cultural perspectives, different dogmatic kind of relationships, all of that. But what you've described as your experience is very similar to mine with the communication, that it cuts to the core of what all of that is about, simplifies it and makes it really down to earth, where you don't need an intermediary. You are the thing.
Exactly. And that's a very big part of why I ended up founding Ecofluency, was because I realized that if I were to continue in the academic path, I'd be so concerned with trying to prove that nature communication was a real thing, which immediately goes against what science is about, which is retaining as much as possible objectivity. And I couldn't do that. And which scientist truly can actually be objective? You're human, you can't. So I decided, well, I'm less interested in how it works, and I'm more interested in that it works and that people can do this, which is why I was like, I'm just going to take this to the public instead. And so now I've got people like you and me, and I've got people from very, very spiritual backgrounds, and I've got like children, and I've got men and women in different cultures all around the world. And that is the beauty, is like you said, everybody can do this. And that's where that intersubjective validation becomes really valuable within a group setting when you're learning, because you can, whenever there's any amount of doubt that comes up, which happens even now, like 11, 12 years down the line, I still get doubt on a daily basis. Maybe that's not a bad thing, because a certain amount of skepticism and doubt of oneself keeps you grounded. But within a group setting, those who are having their first time experiences are like, oh, they got the same thing. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. It's a real thing. I can do this. And so that becomes a benchmark of then certainly developing not only accuracy and confidence, but belief, a deeper belief in that oneness that you were describing.
Oh, I love that so much. So can you talk to us about what ecofluency is? I love that term.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's a word that dropped into my mind in 2018. I was asked by a colleague of mine at the time to review a paper of his, a draft paper on ecoliteracy, which is the term used for being able to read into the book of nature. But the problem I had with that is that it treats nature as if it's a passive thing, and it's a separate thing from humans. It's the capacity to be able to, in our terms, maybe like look at the facial expressions, read lips and body language, rather than just actually having a conversation. Because like you were describing before we started recording, needing an animist worldview requires that you move away from something like ecoliteracy, where it's treating it as passive and separate. And opening a conversation requires that you are acknowledging any aspect of nature, whether it is an animal that we are familiar with, whether it's a microbe, whether it's a rock, whether it's a cloud, whether it's our ancestors or nature spirits, the microbes in our gut, comets, even that all of these contain consciousness. And because they contain consciousness, therefore you can have a relationship with them and you can communicate with them, because that's fundamental to relationship. And so that's what ecofluency is Eco comes from the Greek word oikos, which is home. And this is where, for example, ecology is a study of one's home, economics is the management of one's home. And fluency comes from the Latin fluentum, which is not only about flowing, which is what we think of with languages, but is also the word for relaxed, or I believe that's what I looked at when I was looking at the etymology. And so put together, really what it means is being able to communicate in a free-flowing way with one's home. But more than being able to communicate, there's also, with the relaxed aspect, this invitation to try less and just be. And recognize you are nature. You don't have to do as much. You can actually, there's more that is gained sometimes when you relax into it. So ecofluency is the word that I use as the umbrella for all of my work. So it could be used as a term for nature communication, but it's not yet gotten traction. And I kind of want to keep it just as another term within the widening lexicon or vocabulary for this field of nature communication terminology. And so it's also it's currently a one-woman show operating out of a tiny house in South Africa. Not tiny house as in tiny home, but it's a house. But what it does is create a platform also for the voices of others. So it's going to grow into an organization. I offer through Ecofluency, I offer nature communication consultations. I teach, I do energetic clearings, I work with groups and organizations, individuals, and most of my online work is still currently offered on a pay-what-you-can basis, because I believe that this work needs to be accessible. And then the in-person work will generally have like different tiers of tickets, and there's always going to be free tickets for like farmers and students and beekeepers, anybody involved in agriculture, because I have a soft spot. So yeah, I mean, I could babble on, but does that answer the question of what is ecofluency?
It does. And I just love that. And I love the focus on home and recognizing everything is home and you are home. I did, this makes me think of when years ago, probably actually about the same time that you were getting into animal communication. My background is a little similar to yours in terms of coming from different cultures. And my parents are both English, and I was born and raised in the US, but we moved around like every few years for my dad's work. And so growing up, I didn't have a sense of home. I used to speak with a really thick Northern English accent, but got made fun of when I went to school and learned the American accent. And then I would always come back home to my very British family, and I would like teach about American culture. I mean, I remember my mom saying to me, like, I brought a friend over after school and she said, "Do you want some biscuits?" And I was like, "They're cookies now, Mom." Like, like very like you know, but I recognize looking back that, that 6-year-old version of me was trying to figure out who she was and where she fit in and what this sense of home was. And as an artist, I collaborated on a project that was very much about asking those questions of what home is. And it was titled Loco Neni, which comes from the Esperanto for place nowhere. And it was such an interesting exploration for me personally to explore, what does my relationship to place look like? What are those constituent factors that I'm seeing as creating kind of belonging? And as part of the project, we actually we devised this logo, which was the combination of two Scandinavian letters, the two different O's, one with the umlaut above it and the one with the line through it, that are words upon themselves. So they're letters, but they are words, one letter words that mean island. And I just thought that was so beautiful about bringing these kinds of islands together, these things that feel sort of separate, and actually bringing it together. And I ended up, as part of the project, getting a tattoo of that on me, because part of the learning that came about was this recognition of like body as home. And like you're describing, like with the microbes and everything, like we are brought into question of like, who are we? And where do we situate ourselves, and realizing that we are this kind of cacophony of all of these various aspects. And we are both like here and nowhere at the same time. We're everywhere and situated at the same time. And I love that kind of, it sounds esoteric, but I think it's actually a really practical understanding of who we are and where we find ourselves, and that the focus that you're bringing with Ecofluency of being able to connect into that. So again, it goes back to this animist perspective
Mm.
of like really connecting to the all that is that we are. And it's an amazing thing that you're doing of offering this for people to find their own way into that and explore what that sense of home and flow and all that it entails looks like for them.
Yes, thank you for raising that of who are we, what are we, where are we? Because that's something that I address also in my work. I mean, there's so many brilliant animal communicators in this world, and also plant and animal tree communicators. So I've deliberately kept myself a generalist. And then there are aspects that I deepen. So if we think about what is nature communication, what is possible with it, you and I and many of the listeners might know, but this might be new to some people, about how, yes, you can communicate with animals, and you can communicate with plants and trees, and you can communicate with insects and microbes and rocks and rivers and ancestors and nature spirits and all of them. And you can go really small. I've done a consultation for somebody a few years ago in communicating with the electrons around the lithium atom, because she's a soil quantum physicist and wanted to understand the role of lithium in mental health issues for people, and the quantities are in the soil and so on. And that was wild. So even that is possible. The consciousness that exists in electrons, not even the whole atom, not the neutrons and the rest of the whole atom, but just the electrons. And then, of course, one can communicate with the bacteria and the rest of the microbes that exist on us, which we know by now are 10 times more the number of cells in our body than human cells, which then begs the question, how much of Saskia is actually Saskia, and how much of Alexia is actually Alexia? So when we're having these communications, who are we actually directing the conversation to, and who's answering, whose voice is answering, which then starts to make us wonder more and more, and invites the question of the boundaries of where do I end and the other start. So it's more an exploration of individuation within complexity and becoming oneness, but still keeping that sovereignty, whatever sovereignty means. And this then brings up all kinds of other questions of, well, if you can go into communicating with what Dr. Siobhan Watkins, whose work is microanimism, and she looks at microbial communication. She says the smalls, communicating with the smalls. So then what about the very big? You can communicate with the whole Earth as a being, with the whole solar system, with the whole galaxy even. That's possible. No matter the size of the system or of the being, the organism, that is also possible, because there are layers of consciousness that exist within them. Like when I do communication for people for their pieces of land or their farm or their property, there's a spirit of a wider landscape, but then there's also the spirit of place for just the house itself, the built environment. And what you said earlier on was so important about language, and it is so important because whether we talk about microbes or small, people resonate with those words in the same way that even the spirit of place might be off-putting to people. So then we can use, like you were talking about, what was it, genus? No, when you said genus nowhere, the place of nowhere, that you did your
Loco nani.
loco
Loco
nani.
being place.
Yes, so the genus loci, which
Mhm.
is what's described in biodynamics or in anthroposophy of the spirit of place, that could be another term that could be used. Or overarching intelligence, or the guardian of a place, or the deva, or, overlighting angel. There's so many different terminologies. And for us to be able to feel like, even if we don't know where we sit in the world, our relationship with the rest of nature and finding that right relationship, balance of that, is going to depend on how we orient our mind, which is going to depend on the framework and the frame of reference that we use, which is strongly influenced by words and by language and by terminology. So that's also what I wanted to also mention, is that Ecofluency just offers something different to this field, this broader field. And so I'm always curious what other words come up. So lokoneni is a beautiful term. I'm going to put that in my back pocket and credit you with that when I speak about this in the future. So thank you.
You're welcome. Use it. No, I agree with you. I'm very much into etymology. I love that. And my first degree was in languages, was in French and medieval studies. And part of that interest was the way in which language has evolved and shaped culture and has been shaped by culture, because we are beings, we live in a world and we are beings that like to categorize things, and the way that we create those categories as a human tends to be very much informed by the words that we share with one another. And I one of the things that I think is really interesting about what you're doing, and again, it links to language, but it also asks us to extend beyond it, is even challenging the term kin. This is something that I know Donna Haraway does quite a bit, and asks us to really look at the way that the word kin has been something that we have used to separate and segregate that, and looking at that implies the things that are important to us. So I'll take care of my kin, my own family, right? My bloodline kind of thing. But how we're in a time and a place right now where we're being asked to extend our understanding of kin to everything, to not even just everyone in terms of humans, but into the more than human world. And I know that that's a big part of what you're doing. And I'd just love to hear your perspective on that notion of how we go about creating and establishing a relationship with more than human kin.
That is a very layered question and a good one, because it's something that I don't know that I have the full answer to. I don't think any single human ever could have the answer. So here's part of an answer. First, I like that you use more than human, because some other people would use non-human or other than human. And I use those words, those terms interchangeably sometimes with people to illustrate how does it land in your body, as you say, non-human, other than human, more than human. All of these are anthropocentric. They're human focused as a way of describing the rest of nature and our relationship, the boundary between them. So, and this goes back to home. How do you make yourself at home? Well, firstly, it's with the senses. What is pleasing to the eyes and to the ears? How do you open up other parts of yourself? We know that animal communication happens in a wide variety of ways. And I describe ecofluency in academia in an academic article that I wrote about it. The definition I gave was the capacity to have a dialogue or two-way conversation with any aspect of nature using a wider range of sensory awareness, or an expanded range of sensory awareness. So really, it is using the physical senses, but then there are also, as Rudolf Steiner describes, 12 senses, actually. I can't remember every single one of them, but right now, I know that he talks about our imagination and our intuition as being two of the ways of accessing higher realms of knowledge. And so allowing that our intuition is trained, and not just listening to it willy-nilly, because sometimes it's difficult to discern what is instinct, which could be associated with the gut and could be more survival or primal based, whereas the intuition doesn't have a similar agenda. I believe that the intuition is connected to deeper intelligence. And there are, according to the Heart Math Institute, there are many different ways of classifying what is intuition and how does one access that through the heart as one of the organs of perception for that. But the point I'm trying to make is, how do we get closer to the rest of nature? If that is the question, how do we expand our relationship? It can start in everyday things. When we wake up in the morning, what is it we do with ourselves? The water that we use to perform our ablutions, let's call them, where does that come from? And what is our relationship with water? And that can go really deep into the whole mindfulness aspect, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be a stepwise approach, because water has consciousness, of course, and can communicate, and is one of our ancestors, as one of the elements. The food that we eat, equally so. The clothing that we put on our bodies, natural materials as opposed to synthetic ones. Not that I'm totally against synthetic materials, but all of these play a big role. The fashion industry is the second largest industry in the world, second to only agriculture, and agriculture feeds into fashion. And so they're highly impactful in terms of negative impacts on the environment, as we well know. And then there's, as we talked about, language. How do we even describe what we see? When we see wood on a table, do we recognize that wood is actually still containing consciousness and can be tapped into to have a conversation with the tree it came from or the species of that tree? Are we working closely maybe with, like I am at the moment, with a particular rose? I'm working with rose as a plant essence. So my spiritual journey is often informed by plants and trees. How do we sing? Do we dance? Do we make food? Do we make love? Do we touch the animals around us or our friends, or speak with our colleagues? What love and devotion do we give to our work? All of these are expressions of how we interact with the rest of nature, not just sitting and having a telepathic conversation with an animal, for example, because we are nature. So our whole, even like the way we wear our hair, the jewelry that we wear, makeup that we put on our face, all of that, the way we walk on the earth is a conversation with the rest of nature. And what I focus on, to simplify for myself and others, is to say, yes, all of that is true. And sometimes it requires sitting and actually setting aside time to have a conversation with one aspect, because then it simplifies things for our small human brains to process. And I'm a simple creature, really. So I want to be able to do that in a bite-sized way, because then I know that I can give full attention, and then afterwards I can go and do the silly thing of have a cup of tea and have my biscuits or cookies or whatever, which I still do. That's my crutch. And I would say the body as the instrument of listening, as the temple of where our spirit is housed, and this is shared by many spiritual traditions around the world. Looking after that first and foremost, and then knowing how we engage with the rest of nature, and including other humans, is for me paramount. And I'm not saying I'm perfectly far from it, but that before anything becomes a reflection of how you engage with your house, with other people, with your politics, with money, all of it, with your partner, with your children, with your animals. So, and reflects then upon the relationship we have with the earth. And this is where so many people in this day and age, and has now become very mainstream, is feeling bad, feeling guilty, feeling ashamed about how we treat earth. Earth is suffering, earth is dying. These are the words that we hear. Not necessarily true. Yes, she's in pain. But I will be that unpopular person to say the earth is much bigger, cleverer, older, stronger, wiser than us, as are many of the beings in and on and around her. She doesn't need us to save her. She needs us to save ourselves and focus on our own stuff at home. Because the more we do that, the more we start to change our external behavior, the choices that we make with what we buy, how we travel, and so on. And it doesn't mean become very dogmatic about that. And you have to start weaving your own skirts from grass and so on. But it does mean bringing more awareness in a way that focuses on joy and on beauty and on gentleness and on compassion. Because there's no change that's going to come from guilt and shame and fear. That's just going to make us freeze and feel overwhelmed. So I would say changing the internal state and allowing in gentleness to ourselves is the first point of contact with how we change our relationship with the rest of nature, because that is nature, that inner landscape.
Oh, 100%. I agree so much with everything you just said. And in fact, what you brought up around that sense of needing to change within ourselves first was a really big part of what I discovered through my PhD research, where, one of my big questions was really, so how do these practices these kinds of art practices that allow somebody to suspend disbelief, to step out of the normal way of being and interacting with the world, how can they facilitate this kind of change? Especially when we tend to talk about things like climate change, exactly like you were saying, that we use warlike language. And I think to your point around the importance of language and what that's telling, I mean, I think that's really indicative of our current paradigm of, we use the same kind of language when we talk about cancer,
Yeah.
fighting cancer. It's a very angry kind of energy. And one of the things that I discovered through my research was that, yes, approaching climate change through scientific processes and making technological, evolution and all that kind of stuff is good and has its place. And it's that notion of the and again instead of the but.
Yes, exactly.
And we also need to look at this as climate change really being a spiritual issue, that we treat the environment in the way that we do because of how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our connection to it. So until we rectify what is going on within us, we will continue to do the behaviors, take the actions, make the choices that we're doing that have led to the current situation. So it's great to handle, it's that thing of, in metaphysical circles where they talk about, in order to create any kind of change in the external 3D reality, it starts at the energetic level. So it starts at the within level. As within, so without. The without is just what we see outside of us is merely a reflection of what we are like on the inside, what we think about ourselves, how we value ourselves on the inside. And unless we do the work at the internal level, nothing on the outside is ever going to change.
Yeah, nothing meaningful and lasting is going to change, because it will just repeat the cycle of what's being reflected from the inside. And so, again, like what you were saying, when we weaponize language against ourselves, then we are doing harm to ourselves. And then how are we going to be expected to be creative and come up with solutions and co-create and live in harmony and balance with the rest of nature when you're stuck in survival mode, when you're stuck in a place of feeling ashamed of being human, which I've lived many years in being. And when I got to a stage of being depressed and even suicidal because I'd grown up being taught that we are a scourge on the face of the earth, we're a plague that needs to be wiped out. That is not true based on all of the more than human aspects of nature who I've had a discussion with this about. And I've asked them, what is it you want from us? We want you to recognize that firstly, you are nature too, and you have a right to be here. And you are part of, whether you call it creation, whether you call it evolution, both even. You deserve to be here. You are meant to be here. What we want is the fact that your physical bodies and opposable thumbs and creative intelligence, and we want you to do ritual and ceremony and sing and dance and make art and drum around a fire and do all of those beautiful things and sit and meditate, in addition to making wise purchasing choices, thinking about reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle, and blah, 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 all of that. But from, again, understanding that right relationship. What is the reason? What is the intention, the motivation underlying every single one of your actions? Because that speaks a lot to, are we doing this to be seen to be doing this? Are we doing this because truly that is aligned with us? Nature sees through all of our nonsense. You cannot hide your true intention. And you know this, and listeners will know this. But if this is new to anybody, you get into nature communication, you will quickly learn that anything that you want to have hidden, don't start with it if you don't want to go on a deep personal development journey and evolve spiritually. Like, this is not for you. Stay away, far, far away from it if you don't want to get into that. And that includes taking what you would think of as an agenda that is aligned with nature and have that tipped on its head. I just finished teaching a 6-week course this week. And in this last lesson, we did a longer Q&A. And one of the questions that came up related to, I shared a story about a client in response to this question of, was I sharing this? Client I had a few years ago who lives in the east coast of England, southeast coast of England in Kent. And the largest solar farm in all of Europe and the UK is being plonked on top of a wetland there. She wanted a consultation with me to understand, what does the land want? Because, of course, the agenda from her side would be to have this stopped. And I know that through ritual I've experienced this, that projects of that size and smaller, I don't know, even larger, can be stopped in their tracks and without any logical explanations, like, why is that just not continued? But in this case, the land and those ancestral spirits that were there said, whatever your agenda is, check it at the door, leave it behind. And I was shocked to hear that, because it was like, you may not be able to stop this because maybe it's not meant to stop. Who are we to say that the advancement so-called, of technology and the application of it is not that's not what's part of our evolution? We're learning through mistakes as well. And maybe that's what's needed. So it was like, oh, wow, there's a bigger learning experience to be had here for both of us. And maybe it's also because whatever we were going to do was not going to be strong enough, no matter how many rituals and ceremonies we were going to have. So checking that agenda at the door and staying open-minded and open-hearted to whatever came was what was absolutely necessary. So that's my invitation to listeners. Is like, you go on this journey, be ready to have everything you know be thrown out the window, because what I've learned through this process is that it's as much about learning something new as it is about unlearning the old. And then you think you learn something new, and every time you think you get closer to the truth, you start realizing how far away you are from it. And that's the beauty and the paradox of evolution.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think anyone who owns a dog as well will relate to this, because your dogs are mirrors and they're teaching us, and we have this certain conception of what having a dog is going to look like and be like and all of that. And I would say a similar kind of thing to what you said of don't go down the path of nature communication if you're not willing to do the spiritual work. And I would even say don't get a dog if you're not willing to do the spiritual work, because they bring stuff up. They are huge mirrors, and I think that is a huge reason that they are in our lives, that their role is to really challenge a lot of what we think about ourselves and our agendas, and yeah, all of it, all of it. And I also love with what you're talking about in terms of what we think things should look like and be like might not necessarily be coming from the appropriate wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
it relates back to me that with the understanding of the more than human, tapping into the more than human, that in many spiritual traditions, they talk about like the sort of like spiritual slash psychological, like the ego self and then the higher self.
Mm-hmm.
And so asking which self is actually the one that's in charge here, which self is the one that's created the agenda. And if we look at the kind of limited ego Alexia self, which again, like who is she? She's a bunch of microbes, really, like she's all of this stuff. But that sense of like, is it my human mind that is creating this agenda with a really limited understanding of what's at play here and really limited experiences? Or am I tapping into the more than human sense of self that encompasses like my higher self, but also the fact that I'm in constant communication with all of nature, with all of
Mm-hmm.
the universe? Like I am all of that. So can I draw upon that wisdom in order to help guide the way that I'm taking action in my kind of everyday 3-day life?
Absolutely. And actually, for most of your listeners, it will be dogs as the mirrors, the focus. That's where dogs become that almost like martyrs, poor things. Like they're like, we will take the brunt of the issues that people have and have that projected onto us and mirror it back and love you unconditionally. But actually, all of nature does that. Baboons do that here in South Africa, and especially along the Cape Peninsula near Cape Town. They are very strong mirrors as well. And so many other aspects of nature are, especially those who we would consider pests and pathogens, also very strong mirrors. But what I wanted to actually share in response to what you were saying is that on your point of being mirrors and of them helping us with our spiritual evolution, of course, we help them. I had a client a few years ago whose dog had had 2 operations, and she wasn't sure if he needed another one or if he actually wanted to be put down. And I was at the time unsure about the idea of euthanasia, and this dog taught me a very strong lesson about how we're less attached to our bodies than you as humans are, and sometimes it's very hard for you to let go, but actually we're not, if we feel like we have achieved what we need to in this life. We can willingly be helped along and are grateful for the opportunity, because how many animal people get that opportunity. And so this dog was like, the reason why I chose these people to be with was because they were like, he didn't use these words, but it felt like the sense I got was catapulting me so that when I leave, I'm able to go on a spiritual journey that's much further than most other dogs in the world get an opportunity to be. He was like one of the most well looked after, cared for. These people are family constellations, facilitators as well, and they have horses. So this dog was very much integrated into their spiritual life as well. And when we had a consultation a few months later, checked in with him, and there he was, like, in my framework, the only way I could vaguely describe what I was seeing is like he was in some other kind of form, and not physical form, but he was like going on wild adventures with like 8-dimensional cosmic whales and having a wild ride, that kind of like stuff that sounds like it's science fiction. And relaying this back to the client, she was like, I can't believe he's having such a good time. I'm so glad. I was worried he might feel like he needs to stick around for us. And he was like, oh, no, we covered that, honey. Like, you helped me along. Of course, I'm going to know that, I can go on my adventure now. And so sometimes he circles back around and he comes and he checks on the people. But that was so helpful for them to know that the journey they had been on, all the difficulties with his health, were part of his own challenge, in the same way that we go through in this life. If you happen to unfortunately get cancer, maybe that is a path you need for your spiritual evolution. And to, again, check your agenda at the door and understand what is needed here, what is helpful. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love it. I had a similar experience. It was one of my very first connections with outside of the workshop that I had done with a kind of like a client dog, a practice dog. And it was so incredible, but again, it really made me doubt myself, because I was like, this dog does not feel like a dog. I knew that the dog had passed and the owner was looking for some kind of closure on this situation. And I just felt like as if Buddha had stepped into the room. So of course I'm
Wow.
like, well, I'm making this up. Like what, like,
Yeah.
like you go through that whole thing. And
Yeah.
I then, and the dog was talking about being able to do the work now. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. And when I got into conversation, I was with the human and I was relaying everything back to her. She was like, we used to joke that he wasn't a dog. We used to joke that he was like some sort of supernatural being that had come into our lives. And it was so weird, because towards the end of the feedback session, I noticed behind, she kind of moved. Like we were doing this over Zoom, and she kind of moved. And then I saw behind her, after she moved, a little statue of Buddha. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. I was like, he's there with you. But what the dog was
Wow.
relaying to me was that she was stepping into the next phase of her spiritual journey. She was taking this leap, and he was on the other side helping her to do that, that he needed to pass out of the body, out of this
Mm.
realm, to be able to do the work. So it was both her doing the work and him doing the work. And ironically, he was a cattle dog, which are very working dogs. They love to have a job to do. They love to have a kind of focus, and they love working with their human. So he was taking their roles to a whole new level, but he just couldn't do it in physical form. He needed to be on that other side in order to do it. It was
Wow.
beautiful.
Yeah. Like tag teaming through the
Yeah,
veil. That's super cool.
completely.
I mean,
Com-
I experienced something similar when I do energetic clearings for people and for animals, and for land, and similar to what you're describing. I had a client in Sri Lanka, and she has many, many dogs. And one of the dogs she asked me to do a clearing for, because the behavior had changed completely. And I can't remember now offhand how much of the behavior had changed, but it was exactly that there was this tag teaming of the dogs progress a little bit, they mirror something back. She fortunately is aware of the fact that this is happening. She changes a little bit. She it's like pass the ball back to you. And then between, like, I think it's like 5 or 7 dogs that she has, I can't remember. It's this whole family system. It's a constellation of beings that all do their parts, in the wider system. And then equally, every single one of us has our own spirit team. So it's like then your dog's spirit team and your spirit team are also having a council meeting about what to do next and like what's happening in 3D reality. And so the mind boggles, my mind certainly boggles when I think about what exactly is going on. And sometimes I joke to myself that there's like in those spy movies when they have the control tower and then they've got like people sitting around and they're like, can we do that next? Can we move that there? Yeah, and we're gonna have to activate that. And like it's like that's what's going on that astral plane. Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much. Oh, this is this is so much fun. Saskia, if somebody listening wants to kind of try out interspecies communication right now, whether that's with their dog or going out on the walk or just being in their garden, what are some tips that you might give them to kind of start exploring this for themselves now?
The first thing I would invite is, regardless of whether you're going to doubt yourself or whether you're still a little bit skeptical, maybe there's a part of you that's like, I want to try, but I'm not sure if I can even do it, is to set a clear intention that you can do this, and that what you get will be what is needed, and that you will have clarity in the communication. So setting an intention and creating some kind of a container for it. So this is a big part of what I teach with the 9-step set of guidelines I teach as like a beginner set of guidelines. And go through certain steps that you would with any conversation. Either use that as like a formal way of going about it, or if it's with your own dog, you don't need to formally introduce yourself to your own dog. Be open to allowing that communication is going to happen even without the validation of the animal's behavior changing. Because sometimes we look for cues of like the dog looks up at you or wags the tail or like sits in front of you and is like, now I'm staring at you and we are having a conversation. Like that's creepy. Don't expect the dog to do that. So allow that there's an open-mindedness and an open-heartedness. So many animal communicators will teach or invite that the awareness drops into the heart area. What I will invite as well is that you allow that, as far as feels appropriate for you, that you listen with your whole body. So first, do like a scan of a check of what's going on for me, physically, mentally, emotionally. Make sure that you're well hydrated, because so much of communication happens through your nervous system, and our nervous system is electrical, and so it's got an electromagnetic field, and so much information happens through the electromagnetic field as well. So when we're well hydrated, our whole body works better. And once you know what is your baseline, so to say, it's easier then to look at what changes, to track any changes that happen. So then if you maybe suddenly get a tightness in your chest or an opening in your tummy feeling, like a sort of warm tummy feeling, or if your back is sore or something like that, then you know you can ask, is this mine or is this the dog's? And you can ask the dog or you can ask yourself. There are as many ways of communicating with the rest of nature as there are people alive and more. So what is your way? Maybe it's getting cues of physical sensations and feelings in the body. Maybe you don't want to have it with your eyes closed, or you do. You keep your eyes closed and your inner vision will show you symbols or colors or things. You might hear a voice. You could just go on a workshop with somebody or do a course. Like I've got a 6-week course happening in May that if anybody's interested, it's a longer course. However, for any kind of beginners, setting the intention, allowing that what might arise is not what you would expect. But most importantly, even with your own animals, I would invite that you keep, it's like putting the phone down after a conversation. You close off the conversation in a healthy way so that you retain maybe not control, but management of your energy fields, so that you can retain clarity when you're having conversations with other beings. So you are looking after your own energy field maintenance and staying grounded throughout it all and trusting that whatever is going to come is what's going to come, because this is pioneering work. In a way, as Westernized people, this is something that is relatively new still. We're remembering our way home through this. You're rekindling something that is, yes, our ancestral ability, but we've forgotten. So this is cultural repair on socioeconomic, cultural levels. And so this is how we stitch the world together, by starting small, by starting with animals, and when with other beings as well, if you want to. And be patient with yourself and be gentle, because it can trigger a lot. Yeah. And if you get nothing, be grateful, because even the fact that you know how to do this is quite a big thing. So then try with another animal.
Exactly. Oh, I love those tips so much. I would also add to that, based off of my own experience, that sometimes it's easier to start with an animal that is not your own, because the doubt creeps in when it's your own, sometimes when you're right at the beginning, because it feels like, well, I already knew that about them, or I already sensed that about them. But the reality is you're communicating with your dog all the time. So part of your knowing comes from the fact that you're communicating all the
Yeah.
time. But if you're trying to sort of look at, well, how do I practice this? Sometimes starting with a friend's dog might be a little bit easier, or, where there's not quite that same level of intimacy and it's not about you not being able to communicate with your dog. It's more about getting the doubts out of your mind, because like you and I have both said, Saskia, that when we had those moments where we were able to validate something, that's what opened this up for us, of like, oh, this is real. So if you're not getting something with your own dog, try another dog or try another animal or something, so you can have that experience of the moment of validation to build your own confidence.
And especially if you consider your animal as family, then it's going to be like any kind of triggers that you have with your own family. Imagine going and having like a deep conversation with a parent or a sibling that you have issues with, like that can be very triggering. And so it's being able to understand that those patterns and dynamics that we have from our family of origin are going to feed into the relationships that we have with other close beings, and therefore with the rest of nature. I've trained as a family constellations facilitator, so I bring these things in as well, is that, like you say, sometimes the ones that we are closest to are the ones that are most difficult for us to communicate with. But eventually you get to a point where it becomes easier and easier. But go easy on yourself. And like Alexis said, maybe try with somebody else's dog, or even with a different species if you feel called to it. Because that's, if you don't have experience of communicating with trees or plants, for example, or insects or microbes, and you want to ask practical things that you can check afterwards, like certain medical properties, or like what kind of things they like to eat, that can be a really fun way of building confidence in the accuracy that you get.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you bring up fun, because I think that's the important part, is that we don't take this too seriously, like sitting down, like, I've got to get it right. And that might be the Virgo in me too, of like, it needs to be right. I need to know exactly,
Totally.
but
Totally.
I do think that we generally tend to do that. And if we can come at this with a sense of play and fun, I think that's a big part of what our dogs are teaching us. I think that's a big part of what interspecies communication, more than human communication, can connect us back to, is that playful side of us. So yeah, just have
Yeah.
fun with it. Just try it, see what happens.
Yeah. Treat it seriously, sure, and hold it lightly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
the paradox. It's totally the
It is
paradox.
the paradox. Exactly.
Oh,
Yes.
Saskia, this is wonderful. And I know that you've got a course coming up in May for people who might be wanting
Yes.
to take a larger step, kind of commit a little bit more into their own exploration of this. And you also have a workshop in the UK coming up at solstice time, I believe. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. Exactly. So the 6-week course that I've got May to June is even for total beginners. So we cover the basics, and then it's deepening your practice in a way that is safe and effective and grounded, ideally. And then the retreat that I've got, it's 3 nights, 4 days, I think, 20th to the 23rd of June, and that's going to be at the Franciscan Centre in Ladywell in the UK, in Surrey. And that is over solstice, and that will be similar kind of material that anybody of any experience and background can come to, and is made very accessible price-wise, because it's based on the center was founded based on the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi. So it's for anybody who's interested, and all the details of all my teaching events can be found on the website ecofluency.org, and there's a tab on work with me, and then there's events, workshops, courses, that kind of thing. So all of the details are there. And and for those people who are interested maybe in learning from somebody else, then I also have on the website, and under resources, there's a tab for other voices. And so there are other people who teach this kind of work if what I'm sharing doesn't quite resonate with you, because I'm more interested that people do this, less interested in who they do it with, because that's what we need more of, is just do the thing, get into
Fun.
animals. issue.
100%, 100%. And I'll leave a link to your website in the show notes so people can access it directly from there. And I just wanted to clarify for the workshop that's online, that's starting in May. So that's not in
Yes,
person,
so
that's
the
online.
6-week course. Yes, the 6-week course is online, and the retreat is in person in the UK.
Perfect. And the course starts the 6th of May, is that correct?
6th of May, exactly.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. So if you want to try this a little bit more, go a little bit deeper, there's an online option for you. So that's really amazing. Very cool.
Thank you so much, Alexia. I appreciate that.
Oh, this has been such a joy. And I'm delighted to have this conversation with you selfishly because this is really fun for me. But I also know that people are going to get so much out of it. And I think you offer a really beautiful and practical way for people to really experience what I think is at the core of what we're all looking for, which is a connection to ourselves and to everything around us. We fill that need with all this external stuff, but really at the core, we just want to feel connected.
It comes right back around to that very first workshop I did with Anna Breitenbach, which was I didn't feel lonely anymore. But what I've learned since then is that it's not just about not being lonely. It's about one of the purposes of being human and being alive, I've learned, is to love and to be loved. And that expands to experience the love from all of nature. That abundance, that joy, that scrumptiousness of life. That's what we have access to. Yeah.
Oh, I love it so much. Normally I ask all of my guests at the end of the interview what they feel that dogs, or in your case, like nature, more than nature, have taught them about what it means to be human. But I feel like you just answered that. That's perfect. But if you have anything else that you want to reflect on with that, you're welcome to.
I think I'll leave it at that. If that's what you take away from this conversation, to know, to even if you don't feel it yet, to know on a deeper level that you are loved and that you have every right and it is your responsibility to love.
Oh, I love that so much. Saskia, this has been such a treat, just such a joy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your time, your energy, your generosity of spirit. I know that people are going to take so much away from this. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you to the listeners for coming to this very long discussion. I appreciate it.
Take care.
And to you. Bless you. Bye.
Isn't Saskia amazing? I really hope you take her tips and try communicating with the nature all around you. Get in touch and let me know how it goes and what messages you receive. I'd love to hear. Drop me a line on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. You can find out more about all of the wonderful things that Saskia is doing at ecofluency.org. I've left that link in the show notes. Okay, so you want to know more about the free animal communication session that I mentioned in the intro? If you'd like to enter for the chance to be considered for the opportunity to win a free animal communication session with me for your pet, all you have to do is rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, take a screenshot of your review, and send it to me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. I'll draw one lucky name and announce the winner in our special 6-month anniversary episode that airs Saturday, June 8th, 2024. So to be considered for this, please make sure to send me your screenshot no later than Friday, May 24th. And before I let you go, just a note that this episode was sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks, as well as our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens on Instagram at Aspirationary. That's spelled ASPIRATIONERY. Thank you again for listening, and thank you for rating and reviewing the podcast. I appreciate you all so much. All right, until next time.